At my retirement party, after 37 years, my daughter-in-law called me a bitter old hag. My son agreed, calling me useless. A quiet snap went inside me, a permanent door closing. I smiled. Then I mentioned the $2 million loan their family owed, showing them the numbers. Their faces drained. Listen to how quiet dedication turned into the most satisfying moment. Like, share, and tell me where you are listening from. The air in the private dining room hummed with a warmth I had earned over nearly 4 decades. It was my retirement party, a milestone marking 37 years of diligent, often unsung work as a bookkeeper. Not a glamorous profession, perhaps, but one that had provided a comfortable, stable life for my family. The restaurant, a rather upscale bistro my son Arthur had insisted on, felt almost foreign to me. I preferred quiet evenings, but tonight was supposed to be special, a celebration of loyalty and perseverance. My colleagues, a few close friends, and family were all there, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the chandeliers, their laughter a gentle soundtrack to my bittersweet farewell. I was accepting congratulations, feeling a quiet pride in a career well served, reflecting on the countless ledgers balanced and accounts meticulously maintained. Then Serena Thorne, my son's wife, decided it was her moment to shine, or rather, to eclipse the celebration entirely. She had always possessed a certain dramatic flair, a need to be the center of attention, but tonight she outdid herself. The conversation had drifted, harmlessly enough, to my plans for retirement. I'd mentioned perhaps taking a small trip, something modest, enjoying the quiet life I'd worked for. Serena, in her usual fashion, had interjected with a comment about how she would spend her retirement, rattling off designer brands and exotic destinations. I'd simply smiled, perhaps a little too placidly for her liking, a silent acknowledgement of the vast difference in our priorities. She took my silence as something else entirely. "Honestly, Arthur," she'd announced, her voice carrying across the hushed room, "your mother is such a bitter old hag. It's written all over her face. She's just jealous of our success, of what we have." The words hung in the air, sharp and uncomfortably loud. A collective gasp rippled through the guests, quickly followed by an uncomfortable silence. My heart, which had been gently warming all evening, suddenly felt like a cold stone. I looked at Arthur, my son, the boy I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. I searched his eyes for a flicker of protest, a hint of disagreement with his wife's cruel assessment. There was none. Instead, he straightened in his seat, his gaze firm, almost contemptuous. "Serena's right, Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "You always have been. After 37 years of crunching numbers, what good are you now? You're useless, Mom, an old woman with nothing to do but interfere." Useless. The word echoed, not just in the room, but deep within me. For a moment, the world blurred, and I felt the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes. But then, something shifted. A quiet snap. It wasn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough. The part of me that had always sought their approval, that had bent over backward to maintain peace, that had put their needs before my own for decades, suddenly ceased to exist. A permanent door slammed shut on that old self, on the woman who would tolerate such disrespect. A new resolve, cold and clear as crystal, began to form. They wanted to talk about usefulness, about money. Very well. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, my hands steady. The buzzing silence in the room was almost deafening. Every eye was on me, expecting tears, an outburst, anything but this unnerving calm. I met Serena's smug gaze, then Arthur's dismissive one. My voice when I spoke was low, even, entirely devoid of emotion. "Serena," I said, "since you seem so interested in financial matters, and since you brought up the idea of what one has and what one does not, I think it's time we discuss something very specific." Serena, recovering from her initial surprise at my composure, offered a dismissive laugh. "Oh, are you finally going to confess to that tiny nest egg you've been hoarding? Perhaps you'll fund our next vacation, since you're so generous and clearly have nothing else to spend it on." Her voice dripped with condescension, but I didn't let her finish. My gaze remained fixed on hers, unwavering. "The $2 million loan," I stated, cutting her off mid-sentence. The words hung in the air, flat and precise, like stones dropped into a still pond. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Serena's sarcastic smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Arthur, who had been leaning back casually, suddenly sat bolt upright. They exchanged a quick, panicked glance, then both turned back to me, their voices a synchronized, bewildered chorus. "What are you talking about?" Serena demanded, her tone losing its earlier bravado. "What $2 million loan?" Arthur added, his eyes wide with genuine confusion. I didn't rush. I simply watched them, letting the weight of the number settle, letting their disbelief mar their perfectly curated expressions. "The $2 million that your parents, Serena," I explained, my voice still incredibly calm, "Vivian and Miles Thorne, borrowed from me 3 years ago." Serena's jaw dropped. Arthur stared, completely dumbfounded. "That loan," I continued, offering precise details, "was for a term of 7 years at 5% interest. Your parents, the Thorns, committed to regular monthly payments. However, after the first 6 months, those payments ceased, completely." Serena spluttered, her face paling. That's impossible. My parents have money. They're wealthy. Why would they borrow from you?" The last two words were laced with an old disdain, but now they carried a tremor of fear, a dawning realization that her world might be about to crumble. I simply reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. With a flick of my thumb, I navigated to the loan details, turning the screen to face them. The numbers glowed starkly in the dim light of the restaurant, undeniable proof. "As you can see," I said, pointing to the screen with a steady finger, "the current outstanding balance, including accrued interest, is exactly $2,437,612.18. The screen seemed to magnify the gravity of the situation, the undeniable truth of the figures. Arthur's face was a mask of pure horror. He wasn't just surprised, he looked genuinely sickened. His eyes darted from the screen to me, then to Serena, then back to me. "Mom," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, "what is this? How do you have this kind of money? $2 million? Where did it come from?" His earlier confident dismissiveness was utterly shattered. I smiled, a thin, almost ghost-like smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Arthur," I explained, "my 37 years as a bookkeeper, while perhaps not glamorous, were exceedingly fruitful. I was a very good bookkeeper. And as for your in-laws, well, let's just say that every lavish vacation, every expensive tower, every single designer outfit Serena has boasted about in the last 3 years, every dollar your parents, Vivian and Miles Thorne, have spent came directly from that loan. My loan." Serena suddenly found her almost shrill and desperate, her face twisting into an ugly mask. "You're lying. You're just making this up, because you're jealous. You've always hated my family." Her words were wild, lacking any conviction, a desperate flailing against an unassailable truth. "Oh?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. My voice remained even, steady, betraying none of the deep satisfaction that was beginning to bloom within me. "You think so? Perhaps we should call Vivian and Miles right now. I'm sure they'd be delighted to corroborate your version of events. Or mine." Serena's face crumpled. The bravado, the arrogance, all gone. She looked utterly defeated, small and pathetic. "No," she choked out, her voice barely audible, a pathetic whimper. "Please, please, don't do this. Mom, don't call them." Her words were a complete surrender. Arthur just sat there, frozen, his face ashen, unable to process the magnitude of what had just unfolded. I looked at them one last time, at their stunned, horrified expressions, and then I simply stood up. My purse in hand, my head held high, I turned my back on the stunned gathering, on the son and daughter-in-law who had publicly shamed me, and walked out of the restaurant. The air outside felt crisp and clean, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt an incredible lightness, a profound sense of liberation. The old woman was gone. The new one was just getting started. That night, the quiet of my apartment was a stark contrast to the earlier public spectacle. Sleep was an impossible dream, chased away by a storm of emotions, anger, hurt, but most profoundly a chilling clarity. I sat in my favorite armchair, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, old photographs scattered on the coffee table, their sepia tones blurring faces I once loved, and stacks of meticulously organized financial documents, each sheet a testament to a life lived in carefully constructed secrecy. It was a life I had built with my bare hands, piece by careful piece, for one single purpose: Arthur. Looking at a faded photo of Henry, my late husband, his kind eyes smiling back at me, I was abruptly transported back to that devastating day. I was only 28, and the world had crumbled around me. Henry, vibrant and full of life one moment, was gone the next. A sudden, merciless heart attack, leaving me a widow with an infant son in my arms. The terror was visceral, a cold, gripping fear that squeezed my chest. How would I survive? How would I raise Arthur alone? Everyone advised me to sell our modest home, to move back with my parents, to simplify, to cut my losses. But something stubborn, fierce, and maternal ignited within me. This home was Henry's legacy, the foundation of Arthur's childhood. I refused to let it go. I would provide for him, entirely on my own terms. That resolve became the bedrock of my life. I started at Henderson and Associates, a small accounting firm, taking any odd hours they'd give me. I dove into ledgers, debits, and credits with an almost desperate intensity. Bookkeeping became my sanctuary, a world of logic and order, where numbers always added up, unlike the chaos of my personal life. I discovered I had an innate talent for it, a methodical mind that saw patterns and possibilities where others saw only columns of figures. I mastered the intricacies of financial statements, tax codes, and auditing practices at an astonishing pace. My colleagues were impressed. My superiors began to rely on me implicitly. But the salary from Henderson, while steady, wasn't enough for the future I envisioned for Arthur. Not truly. So, on the side, quietly, away from curious eyes, I began to build something more. A private financial consulting firm. It started with a few friends of friends, small businesses struggling to balance their books. I charged modest fees, almost embarrassingly low, but I delivered exceptional results. I streamlined operations, uncovered inefficiencies, and helped my clients save and grow their money. Word spread, not through flashy advertising, but through whispered recommendations, testament to the trust I meticulously built. My client base grew slowly but surely, a hidden network of loyal individuals who valued my discretion and my unwavering competence. The profits from this quiet enterprise, I didn't spend. I invested strategically. I devoured books on market trends, spent late nights analyzing stocks, and meticulously researched real estate opportunities. I made calculated risks, always with a clear vision. Over the years, those modest fees and shrewd investments began to accumulate, growing into a substantial, almost staggering amount of wealth. My financial acumen, honed by necessity and fueled by love, had transformed me into something far more than just a bookkeeper. I was a quiet force, a woman who understood the silent language of money better than anyone suspected. Yet, I maintained a modest facade, an elaborate charade that became second nature. My car was always an older model, impeccably maintained but never flashy. My clothes were practical, my home comfortable but unassuming. I let everyone assume I was just getting by, a hard-working widow who had done her best but perhaps hadn't truly thrived. It was a deliberate choice born from a hard-learned truth. I had seen how people changed when they knew you had money. They became entitled, demanding, and often less appreciative of genuine effort. I wanted to protect myself, yes, but more importantly, I wanted to protect Arthur. I wanted Arthur to develop his own work ethic, to understand the value of honest labor, to strive and achieve through his own merit, not to expect handouts. I feared that if he knew the extent of my wealth, he would never learn the grit and determination that defined my own survival. So my support was always hidden, a secret lifeline he never knew was there. I secretly funded his private schooling, his summer camps, his college education at a prestigious university. To him, it appeared as if I was struggling, making immense sacrifices, working extra shifts, foregoing luxuries for my sole benefit. I would talk about the strain, about tightening our belts, all to reinforce the illusion that every advantage he had was hard-won and came at a personal cost to me. After he graduated from college, I discreetly leveraged my network, the very connections I had built through my quiet consulting firm, to land him his first coveted job at a reputable financial institution. It was a perfect fit for his ambition, a launchpad he believed he had earned entirely on his own. Later, when he expressed a desire to strike out on his own, to start his own consulting firm, I was his silent partner in the shadows. I arranged initial clients, subtly steering them his way through my extensive contacts, ensuring he had a steady stream of business to build upon. And when he needed a substantial loan to expand his fledgling firm, to open a larger office and hire staff, I quietly co-signed it, making sure his bank saw him as a secure investment without ever revealing my involvement. Arthur truly believed his success was entirely his own merit. He spoke of his business acumen, his natural talent, his tireless effort. He prided himself on being a self-made man, a successful entrepreneur who had pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He never suspected the invisible scaffolding I had so painstakingly erected beneath his feet, never once imagined the silent, relentless support that had underpinned every single one of his achievements. And now, at my retirement party, the fruits of my lifelong sacrifice, the man I had built a secret empire for, had called me useless. The irony was a bitter, unbearable sting. The day Arthur introduced me to Serena Thorne, I remember feeling a curious mix of excitement and apprehension. He had spoken of her with such enthusiasm, a new light in his eyes, and as a mother, I longed for his happiness. But the moment she walked into my modest apartment, an unspoken chill entered the room with her. Serena was undeniably beautiful, a vision of polished elegance, from her perfectly coiffed hair to her designer handbag. Every aspect of her appearance radiated expense, a stark contrast to my comfortable but decidedly unflashy living room. Her initial reaction to my home was not a warm greeting, but a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, her gaze sweeping over my carefully chosen antique furniture and the art on my walls. "Oh, Arthur," she'd said, her voice a little too sweet. "This is quaint, so very cozy." The word quaint wasn't a compliment. It was a gentle yet unmistakable dismissal. My modest apartment and quaint decor were clearly not up to her standards. I saw the flash of disdain in her eyes, quickly masked by a practiced smile. It was the first seed of discomfort, the first hint of the chasm that would eventually open between my son and me. Dinner that evening, a meal I had lovingly prepared, was dominated by Serena's effortless recounting of her life of privilege. She spoke of boarding schools, European vacations, and the latest luxury cars her parents owned, all without a hint of self-consciousness. It was abundantly clear that she had never, not once, worried about money a day in her life. She made sure I understood that her world was one of boundless resources, where financial constraints were an alien concept. Then came the inevitable, patronizing shift in the conversation, directed squarely at me. "It must be quite challenging," she'd said, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical pity, "being a bookkeeper for so many years. I mean, the salary for that sort of work. It's not exactly glamorous, is it? But it's so commendable, Mother Vance, that you've managed to keep this lovely little home all these years." The veiled insult was clear. "You're poor, and I feel sorry for you, but congratulations for not being entirely destitute." I felt like I was being assessed, weighed, and found utterly wanting, a relic from a less sophisticated era. After they left that night, the feeling lingered, an unpleasant residue that clung to me. I couldn't shake the sense of being diminished, of having my entire life's quiet achievements reduced to quaint and challenging. The unease deepened as Arthur and Serena's relationship progressed. Slowly, insidiously, I began to see a change in my son. He started questioning my finances, asking about my retirement plans with a tone that suggested concern, but also a new, unsettling judgment. It was as if he was beginning to see me through Serena's eyes, as someone who was merely getting by, someone whose simple life was something to be pitied, even perhaps to be a little ashamed of. Their wedding was an extravagant spectacle, a testament to the Thornes' supposed wealth and Serena's impeccable taste. It was held at an exclusive country club, the kind of venue I would only ever see in magazines. There were hundreds of guests, a live orchestra, flowers flown in from abroad, and a multi-course gourmet meal that must have cost a fortune. I sat there, dressed in a tasteful but simple gown, feeling utterly insignificant, a tourist in a world I didn't truly belong to. It was a world, I would later discover, that was being funded, unknowingly to Serena, by my loan money. The irony, even then, was a bitter pill to swallow, though I hadn't yet grasped the full extent of the financial deception. I simply saw my son celebrating his union in a lavish display of wealth that felt entirely alien, and a part of me mourned the simplicity we had once shared. After the wedding, the distance between Arthur and me, once a subtle crack, widened into a chasm. Serena, to her credit, was always polite. Her politeness, however, was of a specific kind, the kind one reserves for service providers, for the distant acquaintances one encounters at social events, for anyone considered beneath one's true social circle. There was no warmth, no genuine connection, only a careful, almost performative courtesy that masked a deep indifference. Every interaction with her, however brief, left me feeling smaller, less significant, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. Arthur, meanwhile, slowly but surely adopted Serena's perspective. He ceased asking for my advice on business matters, something he used to do frequently, valuing my financial insight. His calls became less frequent, his tone more perfunctory. Our conversations grew stilted, filled with awkward silences, as if he felt obligated to check in on an elderly relative rather than genuinely connect with his mother. He would talk about Serena's latest expensive purchase or their upcoming lavish vacation, seemingly oblivious to the subtle sting his words inflicted, or perhaps simply no longer caring. He was immersed in her world now, a world of outward appearances and material success, and my quiet, unassuming life had no place in it. I had worked tirelessly, in secret, to build a future for him, to provide him with every advantage, to ensure his success. And in doing so, I had inadvertently created the very thing I had feared most. A son who no longer saw me, who had been taught by his wife to see me as useless. An old woman clinging to a life of quiet mediocrity, oblivious to the hidden empire I had built. An empire that had, in fact, laid the foundation for his own perceived triumph. The pain was a constant ache, a wound that festered with every dismissive glance, every polite but empty word. 3 years ago, a call came that profoundly altered the course of my carefully constructed life. The caller ID flashed Vivian Thorne, Serena's mother. My heart gave a little jolt of surprise. We rarely spoke, our interactions usually confined to polite, if distant, exchanges at family gatherings, punctuated by Serena's veiled disdain. Vivian's voice, usually impeccably composed and dripping with an air of effortless superiority, was now tight, strained, and edged with a desperation I had never heard from her before. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Eleanor," she began, her tone clipped, "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but Miles and we're in a bit of a predicament, a rather severe one, actually." She went on to explain in hushed, almost frantic tones that the Thorne car dealerships, the very foundation of their family's ostentatious wealth and Serena's endless boasts, were failing rapidly. Mismanagement, a downturn in the market, a few ill-advised investments. The details were vague, but the conclusion was stark. They were facing imminent bankruptcy. They needed immediate capital, a substantial infusion of oil to stave off disaster. Then came the line that, even now, makes me clench my jaw. Vivian, after a moment of uncomfortable silence, cleared her throat and cautiously stated, "We heard through mutual acquaintances that you might have some resources, that you, are perhaps more financially astute than you let on." The bitter irony of her words was a sharp, cold jab. She who had always looked down her nose at me, the poor bookkeeper living in her quaint apartment, was now seeking help from the very person she had so casually dismissed. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Yet, despite the sting of her veiled insult, the genuine fear in her voice made me pause. It wasn't just a threat to her pride. It was a threat to their entire existence, and by extension, to Arthur in Serena's world. I thought about Arthur, my son, and how utterly devastated he would be if the illusion of his in-laws' wealth shattered. I pictured Serena, stripped of her designer labels and lavish lifestyle, and the emotional wreckage it would cause. not just for her, but for Arthur, who had so completely integrated into her life. A part of me, the enduring maternal part, still hoped that this act of extraordinary generosity, this secret salvation, might finally bridge the chasm that had grown between us. Perhaps, just perhaps, it would earn their respect, or at least their quiet gratitude, if not their understanding. Swallowing the bitter taste of irony, I asked, my voice betraying nothing of my internal conflict. "How much do you need, Vivian?" There was a hesitant pause. Then she uttered the staggering sum. $2 million, Eleanor. We need $2 million immediately. The next day, I found myself in the sleek, minimalist office of Brenda Hayes, a lawyer specializing in private lending. Brenda was a no-nonsense professional, sharp as a tack and utterly discreet, one of the many connections I had cultivated over the years through my hidden consulting firm. Vivian and Miles Thorne sat across from me, their usual composure replaced by a palpable anxiety. They looked utterly out of place, stripped of their usual pretense, their face etched with worry lines I hadn't noticed before. The terms of the loan were laid out with meticulous precision. A 5% interest rate, a 7-year repayment schedule, and crucially, personal guarantees from both Vivian and Miles, ensuring the debt wasn't solely tied to their failing businesses. Vivian and Miles, however, had one non-negotiable condition: absolute confidentiality. They were almost pleading. "Eleanor," Vivian implored, her voice lowered, "this cannot get out, especially not to Serena or Arthur. Our dignity, our standing, it would be utterly ruined. Please, for their sake." They insisted on structuring it as a private investment in their business from an anonymous entity, shielding my direct involvement entirely. I agreed. My motives were complex, tangled with residual love for my son, a faint hope for reconciliation, and a deep understanding of the destructive power of public humiliation. The first few months, payments arrived like clockwork. The Thornes used the capital to stabilize their dealerships, injecting much-needed liquidity, and for a while the facade held. Serena continued her lavish spending, her social media posts filled with images of exotic vacations and opulent parties, entirely unaware that her lifestyle was being propped up by the useless bookkeeper she so casually dismissed. For a fleeting period, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps this was the path to a different future, one where my quiet support would eventually be recognized, or at least that my son and his wife would be spared the catastrophic fallout of financial ruin. But then, the meticulously prompt payments began to falter. First, they were late, accompanied by vague excuses and promises of catching up. Then they stopped altogether. Weeks turned into months. My quiet professional reminders were met with silence, or increasingly, with thinly veiled annoyance from Vivian. It was clear then, with a crushing certainty, that the Thornes weren't borrowing in good faith. Not truly. They were merely buying time, postponing the inevitable, gambling that the poor bookkeeper would be too meek, too insignificant, or too devoted to her son to ever demand repayment. They expected no repercussions from someone they believed was beneath them, someone who couldn't possibly exert any real financial leverage. They had underestimated me profoundly, and now the bill had come due. If you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please make sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of what happens next. The stakes are about to get even higher. The morning after my retirement party, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The dull ache of disappointment, the years of quiet resentment, had coalesced into a sharp, decisive focus. The useless old hag was gone, replaced by the shrewd financial mind that had built an empire in the shadows. The first call I made was to Brenda Hayes, my lawyer. "Brenda," I said, my voice steady, devoid of any tremor, "it's about the Thorne loan and some other matters." Brenda, ever the professional, was already ahead of me. "Eleanor, I've been monitoring their activity. It appears the Thornes have been discreetly shopping for refinancing options for other debts, significant ones. We've identified at least an additional $400,000 they're trying to restructure." My jaw tightened. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just neglecting my loan, they were actively using my money to play a shell game, servicing minimum payments on other creditors while completely ignoring their substantial debt to me. They were treating me as a silent, easily exploitable resource, a bottomless well of cash with no expectation of repayment. And that's not all, Brenda continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. She explained that a peculiar probate court document had surfaced, an inquiry made by the Thorns legal team regarding the challenging of wills based on mental capacity. A cold dread, quickly replaced by a surge of pure fury, washed over me. I instantly grasped their insidious plan. They think I'm losing my mental capacity, don't they? I stated, not a question, but a chilling realization. The implication was sickeningly clear. They intended to void my loan, to declare me legally incompetent, thereby rendering my agreements null and void. They wanted to steal my money, not just through neglect, but through a brazen act of legal manipulation, exploiting my age in their carefully crafted narrative of my supposed decline. A dangerous calm settled over me. Brenda, I instructed, my voice razor sharp, I want you to arrange a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation by the best neuropsychologist in the state. I want every single aspect of my cognitive function meticulously documented and certified. I want it irrefutable. My mind raced, already 2 steps ahead of their pathetic machinations. And while you're at it, I added, a hint of something dark and resolute entering my tone, I need you to prepare a new will, a very specific one. The future of my fortune and my legacy was about to undergo a radical revision. My second call was to David Kim, my longtime financial advisor, the only person besides Brenda who knew the true extent of my wealth and the intricate web of my investments. David, I began, skipping the usual pleasantries, I need a full, in-depth analysis of Arthur's finances. Every account, every investment, every asset. I need to understand his complete financial picture, down to the last penny. David, whose calm demeanor rarely wavered, picked up on the shift in my tone immediately. Eleanor, he ventured cautiously, you sound different. Everything is about to be very different, David, I replied, the words hanging heavy with unspoken promise. Very different indeed. He understood. David had been with me through the quiet years of accumulation, and he knew that when I spoke with such conviction, significant changes were always afoot. The third call was the most difficult, the one that twisted my stomach into knots, even amidst my newfound resolve. It was to Arthur. Arthur, I said, forcing a measured calm into my voice, I need you and Serena to come to my apartment this evening, 7 o'clock. There was a hesitant pause on the other end, a clear indicator that the previous night's public humiliation still lingered. Mom, Shabane, Arthur began, his voice laced with discomfort. Serena is really upset about last night. Maybe we should wait a bit. Let things cool down. The suggestion was typical Arthur, always avoiding confrontation, always prioritizing Serena's delicate sensibilities. But the old Eleanor, the one who would have caved to his wishes, was gone. No, Arthur, I cut him off, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Tonight, 7 o'clock. This can't wait. The silence that followed was heavy, but eventually he conceded. All right, Mom, we'll be there. The line went dead. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the immense weight of what I was about to unleash. The stage was set. The final act of their deception was about to be revealed, and with it, the truth of who I truly was. They had chosen to treat me as useless, as a bitter old woman whose money they could manipulate and whose will they could invalidate. They were about to learn the profound cost of that misjudgment. The doorbell chimed precisely at 7 o'clock. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. When I opened the door, Arthur and Serena stood on my doorstep, a tableau of barely contained anxiety. Serena's face was blotchy, streaked with fresh tear tracks, her eyes red-rimmed, an obvious performance of victimhood designed to elicit sympathy. Arthur, usually so composed, was visibly nervous, his gaze darting around my living room as if searching for an escape route, his hands fidgeting. Arthur, ever the diplomat, immediately launched into an attempt to placate me, his voice a strained mixture of apology and accusation. Mom, he began, gesturing vaguely. My parents are incredibly upset. We've all had a difficult night. Maybe you were just a little confused last night, emotional with the retirement and everything. He was trying to frame my outburst as a symptom of my age, a temporary lapse in judgment, an emotional delusion. I didn't let him finish. My patience had worn thin to the point of transparency. "Just stop talking for a moment, Arthur," I interrupted, my voice calm but laced with an undeniable authority that instantly silenced him. "And both of you, listen." I walked to the coffee table, where I had meticulously laid out several thick, bound documents. I picked up the first one, a weighty tome. "These," I announced, holding them up for them to see, "are the loan documents. Signed, notarized, legally binding, every single page." I handed them to Arthur. His hands trembled slightly as he took them, his eyes scanning the first few pages. The skepticism that had been etched on his face slowly morphed into dawning horror as he recognized his in-laws' signatures, the legal jargon, the formal seal of Brenda Hayes' firm. This is real," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with a growing sense of dread. "Indeed, Arthur, it is very real," I confirmed, my voice unwavering. "And as of this morning, with interest and penalties for non-payment, the outstanding balance on that loan is exactly $2,612,418. The numbers spoken aloud in the quiet of my living room hung in the air like an inescapable judgment. Serena, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally managed to speak, her voice a fragile whisper, entirely stripped of its usual haughtiness. "But how do you have this kind of money?" The question was a reflection of their deepest, most fundamental misunderstanding of me. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. "While you, Serena, and your parents, and even you, Arthur, were assuming I was some pathetic, aging bookkeeper, a useless old hag clinging to a modest life, I was building something else entirely. A financial portfolio, discreet and diversified, that would make your parents' car dealerships look like a child's lemonade stand. My private consulting firm," I continued, watching their faces intently, "has been very successful. I've quietly managed fortunes, advised high-net-worth individuals, and made astute investments for decades." Then came the line that landed like a lead weight. "I am that businessman, Serena. I saved your parents from losing everything." The color drained from her face. The revelation, the sheer scale of my hidden wealth and my direct role in propping up her family's facade was almost too much for her to process. Then, to their utter shock, I reached for a small digital recorder on the table. "Speaking of things said," I began pressing play. The room was instantly filled with the amplified voices from my retirement poem. Serena's sharp, cruel voice declaring me a bitter old hag and jealous. Arthur's cold, dismissive agreement, "You're useless, Mom, an old woman with nothing to do but interfere." Their own harsh words, delivered with such casual cruelty, echoed in the silent room, a damning testament to their true feelings. Arthur flinched, his face crimson. "Mom, come on," he pleaded, trying to reclaim some shred of decency. "We were upset. We said things we didn't mean. You know that." But I met his gaze, my eyes hard. "No, Arthur," I rebutted, shaking my head slowly. "You said exactly what you meant. You showed me exactly what you thought of me, what you think of all my years of work, my quiet sacrifices." Then I turned my attention back to Arthur, the pain in my voice now tinged with a steely resolve. "And as for your own self-made success, Arthur, let's be entirely clear." I began to expose the years of quiet support, the initial clients I had discreetly steered his way for his fledgling firm, the quiet co-signing of his expansion loans, the subtle ways I had pulled strings in the background to ensure his path was always smoother than he realized. His face went from red to ashen as the truth of his carefully constructed illusion began to unravel. He looked at me, then at Serena, then back at me, the picture of a man utterly devastated by the shattering of his own self-perception. But the final blow was yet to come, the one that truly exposed the depths of their betrayal. "And then," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "there's the matter of Vivian and Miles's other little scheme." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "They didn't just plan to ignore their debt to me, Arthur. They planned to have me declared mentally incompetent." Arthur stared, horrified. "What? No, Mom, that's insane. My grandparents would never—" He trailed off, seeing the unwavering certainty in my eyes. I simply pushed another document across the table. A private investigator's report detailing weeks of surveillance, disguised wellness checks by Thorne Associates, and carefully documented concerned observations about my habits, my memory, my supposedly failing health, all meticulously compiled to support their claim of my declining mental capacity. It was all there, a chilling account of their calculated deception, the ultimate betrayal. They planned to void my will, Arthur, I stated, my voice heavy with the weight of that treachery, to take everything, and they were using your concerns about my well-being as part of their evidence. I looked from Arthur's shattered face to Serena's terrified, tear-stained one. Now you both learn what it really costs, I concluded, my voice cold as ice, to treat someone as disposable. The morning after the confrontation, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. There was no more room for sentimentality, no more hope for reconciliation. The pain was still there, a dull throb beneath my resolve, but it no longer swayed my purpose. They had chosen their path, and now I would ensure they walked it, barefoot and bleeding. I began methodically dismantling the financial empire I had so carefully, so secretly built around Arthur. My first stop was First National Bank. I walked into the sleek, modern lobby, feeling a stark contrast between its polished professionalism and the emotional wreckage of the previous night. I had an appointment with Thomas Sterling, the senior vice president, a man who, like David Kim, knew the quiet power I wielded. We exchanged polite greetings, but the air in his office was thick with unspoken understanding. I got straight to the point. Thomas, I said, my voice unwavering, I'm here to formally remove myself as guarantor from Arthur Vance's business credit line. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise in his usually impassive eyes. He knew the terms of that agreement intimately. Eleanor, he cautioned, his voice lowered, that's a substantial credit line, $750,000. Without your guarantee, the bank's risk assessment will change dramatically. His interest rates will almost certainly increase, and he may find himself in breach of his existing covenants. This could lead to an immediate call on the loan. He wasn't trying to dissuade me, merely outlining the severe consequences. I met his gaze, my resolve ironclad. That, I replied calmly, my voice firm and without a hint of hesitation, is Mr. Vance's problem to solve. Thomas nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that the game had changed, and I was no longer playing by the old rules. The paperwork was swiftly processed, the official signature severing a financial lifeline Arthur didn't even know existed. My second stop was Meridian Investments, where I met with David Kim. He had worked tirelessly through the night, as requested, to provide a full analysis of Arthur's financial situation. The report laid bare Arthur's precarious state. Eleanor, David began, his tone grave, Arthur's business is highly leveraged. He's been expanding aggressively, relying heavily on that credit line, and frankly on the consistent revenue from the clients you referred to him. Without your guarantees and with a significant loss of clients, his cash flow projections look grim. Grim is precisely what I'm aiming for, I stated, my eyes fixed on the detailed spreadsheets. David, I need you to reclaim the 3 major clients I referred to Arthur over the past 3 years, the ones that represent approximately 60% of his current revenue. Divert them back to my private consulting firm or to other trusted associates. I want this done discreetly, professionally, and immediately. David didn't flinch. He simply nodded, making notes, understanding the precision of my surgical strike. Arthur's empire, which he so proudly believed was self-made, was about to crumble, brick by carefully placed brick. My third and perhaps most emotionally charged stop was a lunch meeting with Vivian Thorne at the country club, the very epitome of the lavish lifestyle my loan had sustained. She arrived impeccably dressed as always, but there was a new tension in her posture, a flicker of fear in her eyes. She attempted a practiced smile, but it faltered. I didn't engage in small talk. I simply placed a thick, bound report on the table between us. Vivian, I began, my voice clear and devoid of any warmth. This is a forensic accountant's report. It details precisely how every dollar of my $2 million loan was spent, from the moment it entered your accounts. Her face, usually so composed, began to pale. I then proceeded to list them, item by damning item, each one a fresh wound. $27,000 for your American Express bill, covering those designer bags and dinners. A brand new Mercedes-Benz, $65,000. Serena's credit card, $32,000, including her shopping spree for that European vacation she flaunted on social media. And of course, the substantial sum you allocated for Serena's bridal shower and wedding planning, which I know you tried to pass off as a private family gift to Arthur and Serena. With each item I read, Vivian's composure shattered further. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the desperate woman beneath. Tears welled in her eyes, trickling down her cheeks, smudging her expensive makeup. "Stop," she choked out, her voice breaking. "Please, Eleanor, just stop. We were desperate. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Vivian," I countered, my voice as cold as ice. "I understand you were desperate, but you chose to exploit my generosity, to dismiss me as a fool, and then, most unforgivably, to plot to declare me mentally incompetent to avoid repayment." I then slid another document across the table. "This is a formal demand for immediate full repayment, $2,843,712, due within 30 days. The number had grown, reflecting continued interest and additional legal fees. Vivian stared at the document, her eyes wide with unadulterated despair. 30 days? We don't have that kind of money, Eleanor. You know that. This will destroy us, everything we've built." Her voice rose, bordering on a wail. I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "Then you'll need to liquidate assets, Vivian. The dealerships, the house, the yacht, the country club membership, whatever it takes." There was no softening in my voice, no hint of compromise. "There will be no new payment plan, no extensions, no more second chances. The debt is due, in full." The silence that followed was broken only by Vivian's ragged sobs, the sound of an empire collapsing. Vivian Thorne sat across from me, her face a mask of utter despair, her expensive lunch untouched. The elegant country club dining room, usually a beacon of her social prowess, had become the scene of her financial ruin. As her sobs subsided into ragged breaths, she looked up, her eyes pleading, and confessed yet another, even more venomous, betrayal. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "there's something else you need to know. Serena has been systematically documenting your unusual behavior." A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I remembered the odd questions, the casual observations, the way Serena's eyes would sometimes linger on me, calculating. Vivian explained, each word a fresh cut, that Serena's ultimate goal was to convince Arthur to petition for guardianship over my affairs. My blood ran cold, quickly replaced by a furious inferno. She didn't just want to dismiss me. She wanted to disempower me entirely, to seize control. She wanted control of my assets, I stated. The words clipped, sharp. The sheer audacity, the callous disregard for my autonomy was breathtaking. Vivian, still weeping, nodded. She explained how Serena had framed it to Arthur, presenting it as protecting me, showing him carefully curated articles on elderly financial abuse, subtly planting seeds of doubt about my mental acuity. The realization that my own son, the boy I had built an empire for, was prepared to strip me of my autonomy, to invalidate my judgment based on the insidious manipulations of his wife, was a devastation beyond words. It wasn't just a financial betrayal, it was a profound, personal violation of trust. It struck at the very core of my identity, my intelligence, my fiercely guarded independence. I stood up, pushing back my chair with a decisive scrape that echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. "Vivian," I declared, my voice resonating with a power I hadn't known I possessed, "you and Miles and Serena, and even Arthur, will now face the full consequences of your choices. All of you." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Vivian to her tears and her crumbling world. That evening, my phone became a relentless instrument of their panic. Arthur's calls came in quick succession, each one more frantic than the last. Serena's voicemails, high-pitched and laced with a manufactured hysteria, detailed her parents' distress, the impending doom, the unfairness of it all. I listened to none of them. I let the calls ring, the The messages pile up, a soundtrack to their unraveling. The next morning, Arthur arrived at my apartment, his face haggard, his usually impeccably styled hair disheveled. He looked as though he hadn't slept, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't bother with the doorbell, instead pounding on the door until I opened it. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "you have to stop this. What are you doing? This is destroying innocent people. This is going to ruin everything." "Innocent people, Arthur?" I challenged, my voice calm, almost detached, despite the storm raging inside me. "Let's define innocent. Is it your mother who provided the capital to save your in-laws' failing business, only to be repaid with default in a plot to declare her mentally incompetent? Is it me, Arthur, the useless old hag you publicly disowned? Or are the innocent ones Serena, who meticulously documented my unusual behavior to convince you to petition for guardianship over my affairs so she could control my assets? Or your parents-in-law, who systematically defaulted on a $2 million loan and then, when confronted, conspired to invalidate my will? I recounted each betrayal, each deliberate act of deceit, watching his face contort with a mixture of shame and disbelief. Arthur finally looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom," he mumbled, "I was concerned about your choices. You live so modestly. That old car. We just wanted to make sure you were all right, that you weren't being taken advantage of." He was still clinging to their manufactured narrative, still unable to see his own complicity. I sighed, a long, weary sound. "Arthur," I said, "do you truly believe your success, your consulting firm, your rapid growth, was entirely your own doing?" He looked up, confused. "Of course, Mom. I built it from the ground up. My hard work." "No, Arthur," I stated, a lifetime of secrets finally unveiled. "You built it on the foundation I laid for you. For 15 years, I've been your silent partner, your unseen benefactor. The initial clients for your firm? Mine. The co-signee loans for your expansion? Mine. The network of contacts that opened doors for you? Mine. Every step of your self-made career was meticulously supported by me. You never knew because I wanted you to build your own work ethic, to feel the pride of genuine achievement. I wanted you to become a man who understood the value of hard work, not one who expected handouts. But you chose to believe you were superior, and in doing so, you allowed yourself to be manipulated into believing your own mother was a feeble old woman whose wealth you could simply appropriate." Arthur's face crumpled. He looked utterly broken, tears welling in his eyes. "Mom, no," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not true. I do love you, Mom. It is real." "No, Arthur," I countered, my voice softened by a sudden, aching sadness for the boy he once was. "You don't love me. You love the version of me that you can feel superior to, the version that doesn't threaten your carefully constructed world. You love the idea of a mother who exists to be pitied and, if necessary, controlled." It was then, in the midst of his emotional unraveling, that Arthur dropped the ultimate bombshell. "She's pregnant, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Serena, she's 8 weeks pregnant." The words hit me like a physical blow, a grandchild. My grandchild. For a fleeting moment, my resolve wavered. The image of a tiny, innocent life, untainted by the greed and betrayal of its parents, flashed before my eyes. A pang of raw maternal instinct, the same instinct that had driven my life's secret sacrifices, threatened to overwhelm me. But then I looked at Arthur's pleading face, at the years of calculated disregard, at the depth of their planned treachery. The image of the child solidified my resolve, rather than softened it. This child deserved a legacy built on integrity, not on stolen wealth and manipulation. My gaze hardened. "The Thorns will still repay every cent," I stated, my voice firm. "And Arthur, from this moment on, you stand entirely on your own. There will be no more hidden support, no more silent lifelines. You will build your own future, truly, for the first time." 6 months later, the world looked and felt entirely different. I stood in the sleek, glass-encased lobby of Meridian Tower, a building I had quietly acquired years ago, now gleaming with my name. It was my own commercial property, transformed. My new office, Hastings Financial Consulting, Private Wealth Management, occupied an entire floor, a testament to decades of discreet excellence now finally unveiled. The hushed efficiency of the space, the breathtaking city views, it all reflected the woman I had finally allowed myself to become. My assistant, Sarah, a sharp and incredibly organized young woman, glided up to me, tablet in hand. "Eleanor," she began, her voice crisp, "your schedule for today is packed. Mr. Henderson from Sterling Enterprises, the new acquisition meeting, and another persistent call from Arthur Vance. He's left 3 messages since morning." I simply nodded, a faint smile playing on my lips. My decision to stop hiding my wealth, to finally embrace the full scope of my financial acumen, had led to an immediate and overwhelming business success. Clients, many of whom I had previously managed in the shadows, were flocking to my public firm, eager to benefit from my proven expertise. The consequences for the Thorns had been devastating, yet precise. Their bankruptcy was finalized 3 months ago. The dealerships, the sprawling mansion, the yacht, all liquidated to satisfy their creditors, including me. Vivian and Miles now lived in a modest rental, both working jobs far below their former social status. Vivian was a receptionist at a small real estate firm. Miles managed a local car wash. The fall from grace had been complete and unsparing. Serena, I heard through various channels, was utterly devastated by her changed circumstances. The loss of her lifestyle, the public humiliation, the strain of her parents' bankruptcy, it had all taken a heavy toll. Her pregnancy, which had begun amidst such turmoil, had been difficult. Her carefully constructed world, built on borrowed money and superficial displays, had utterly collapsed. Arthur, on the other hand, had shown a surprising resilience. Stripped of my hidden support, the guaranteed clients, and the co-signed credit lines, his business had indeed faltered initially, but faced with true adversity for the first time, he had buckled down. He had sold his lavish house, moving with Serena to a modest neighborhood. He now drove a used practical car, and Serena, for the first time in her life, was shopping at discount stores, a stark contrast to her former designer haunts. He was building his business genuinely, from the ground up, perhaps for the very first time. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, despite the pain, I had inadvertently forced him to become the man I had always hoped he would be, self-reliant. Their daughter Lily had been born 3 months ago. I had only a simple birth announcement photo, a tiny bundle wrapped in white, innocent of the storm that surrounded her arrival. I kept it tucked away, a silent reminder of the future, a future I had yet to decide if I would be a part of. Recently, a Forbes journalist, intrigued by my sudden emergence as a powerhouse in private wealth management, had interviewed me. She asked, her voice tinged with curiosity, if I regretted how I had handled the situation with my son, if the financial ruin of his in-laws and the drastic shift in his own life weighed on me. I met her gaze, unflinching. "I regret that it was necessary," I stated, my voice steady, "that it had to come to such a public, painful culmination. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I regret allowing myself to be underestimated for so long, and I refuse to do so ever again." That evening, as I was settling into my apartment, the doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "Eleanor, I have a Serena Thorne here with a baby." My heart gave a strange, unexpected lurch. I paused for a moment, then, with a deep breath, I replied, "Send her up." When the elevator doors opened, Serena stood there, a very different woman from the polished, disdainful figure I had last seen. She looked tired, her clothes simple, her face devoid of makeup, but her eyes held a humility I had never witnessed before. Cradled gently in her arms was a tiny baby, asleep. "Eleanor," Serena began, her voice soft, hesitant, I just wanted to show you." She stepped forward, offering the baby to me. "This is Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your granddaughter." I reached out, my hands trembling slightly, and took the precious bundle. Lily's tiny fingers curled instinctively around my own, her breath soft against my chest. My heart constricted, a profound, aching tenderness overwhelming me. This tiny, innocent life, a part of Arthur, a part of me, a part of Serena, was a testament to hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. As I held Lily, Serena's voice broke the silence. Eleanor, she began, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time. I am so, so sorry. For everything, for what I said, what I thought, what I did, how I let my parents manipulate us both. I was wrong, so incredibly wrong. Please, can you ever forgive me? I looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing a vulnerability I had never imagined possible. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there, a raw wound. But holding Lily, I felt a new possibility emerge. Serena, I said, my voice quiet, I'm not ready to forgive, not yet. The pain runs too deep. The betrayals were too profound. She flinched, but I continued, but I am ready to consider the possibility that people can change, that you can change, that you have changed. I gently returned Lily to her mother. This is a new beginning, Serena. But trust is not given, it is earned. You and Arthur have a very long, very difficult road ahead if you truly want to rebuild anything with me. There will be strict conditions, absolute honesty, no more games, no more manipulations, ever. Serena nodded, tears still flowing, but now with a fragile hope in her eyes. Then I added, almost as an afterthought, tell Arthur he can call me, not to talk about business or money or his parents, to talk about Lily. As Serena left, the quiet of my apartment returned, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was filled with the faint scent of baby and the echo of a newfound freedom. The road ahead would be long, certainly difficult, but for the first time in many years, the possibility of being a family again, in some new, honest form, seemed just within reach. And that, I realized, was a hope I was finally ready to embrace.